The suspected killer of a sheriff's deputy in Texas appeared in court today for the first time. Shannon Miles has been charged with capital murder, and he is being held without bond. Prosecutors say Miles shot Darren Goforth in the back of the head Friday night outside of Houston while the deputy was pumping gas. He allegedly fired a total of 15 times. Investigators have not determined a motive, but the sheriff of Harris County is partially blaming the dangerous rhetoric being spewed by anti-police protesters across the country.
Our system of justice absolutely requires law enforcement to be present to protect our community. So at any point when the rhetoric ramps up to the point where calculated, cold-blooded assassination of police officers happened, this rhetoric has gotten out of control. We've heard Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, cops' lives matter too. So why don't we just drop the qualifier and just say lives matter?
Here's some of the rhetoric Sheriff Hickman is referring to. Some Black Lives Matter protesters chanted this over the weekend.
Blanket, fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
Sheriff David Clark of Milwaukee is irate. He accuses the Obama administration of starting this war against police.
I am too pissed off tonight to be diplomatic about what's going on, and I'm not going to stick my head in the sand about it. I said last December the war had been declared on the American police officer led by some high-profile people, one of them coming out of the White House, one coming out of the United States Department of Justice. And it's open season right now. There's no doubt about it.
Strong words, but the rhetoric can be backed up by these recent protests, the very divisive and dangerous rhetoric that we're hearing from these protesters.
So there were two things from the weekend that they're just ringing true, actually up until this afternoon. Number one was the sound of those chants, pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon, over and over and over again. And then the other sound, Kimberly, if you listen to that Miles, Shannon Miles in the courtroom, the shackles on his feet, the clanging of the shackles, a silent courtroom with all the cops lining the wall. Those two sounds ring true, and you wonder, did the first thing have anything to do with the next? And then you look at what happened. The prosecutor described the crime. Shannon Miles walked up to a cop who was filling his gas tank, facing away, no confrontation, and pumped 15 bullets into the guy. There's absolutely no reason for it to happen other than you want to make the
Well, it was an execution. If you want to refer to it accurately, he shot him, right, then went over, stood over him, and continued to shoot him while he's trying to defend himself.
With Sheriff Hickman and say that whatever happened over the weekend with the Black Lives Matter group probably had some effect on what happened that Friday night.
Dana, how do you see it?
Well, one of the first questions I had was, had Shannon Miles had some sort of an interaction with the officer? And it turns out that is not true. He hasn't. He did have criminal background, but nothing in relationship to this officer. It is a curious thing about the White House's decision making on this. And I've always wondered about how they make decisions on what sort of local crimes are going to talk about. Sometimes they come out right away, even before you have all the information and the president makes a big statement. On something like this, they're silent. And you do have to wonder at some point, does the White House not realize that there is this anxiety amongst the police, there may perhaps a rift between the communities and the police officers, and then the growing movement, seems a very powerful movement, of Black Lives Matter. And will they decide to say something? I think that they should, but it seems to me that they are trying to hold back as long as possible.
All right. Hi, Tom.
Hi. I don't think Sheriff Hickman went far enough. I mean, I'm with Sheriff Clark.
Right.
I think it's shut it down time. I think it's ridiculous. Right. And I think that this is criminal stuff. These organizations, it's not a civil rights movement. Call it what it is. It's a lie from the beginning. And these protests, I'm going to put a lot of responsibility, not just a little bit. It contributed to. This is a violent group. I think it's time to shut them down. And the federal government's not going to do it. I think the state governors should go in, and when there's protests, shut them down. People are drunk on rights in this country. These people are violent. It's horrible, and I think they should go in there and do whatever they have to. I don't know if it's RICO laws or something. I mean, this is like a criminal organization. I think it's time to arrest these leaders because they're threatening people, and they're causing violence.
Right, and at a certain point, it's worse, to me, it seems, than, shouting fire in a crowded theater, which is one of the constitutional law cases that we talk about. But I know, Juan, you seem utterly confused because you have a very quizzical look on your face.
I am. I'm just surprised by so many levels. First of all, I don't understand what Sheriff Clark of Milwaukee is talking about. He never said why he would make this charge against the Justice Department. I don't know if he's talking about Eric Holder. I don't know if he's talking about Loretta Lynch. He said he's making this charge against the White House for inspiring this. You know, I can't tell you the number of people who are not only in the White House, but in terms of senior black leadership in Congress and elsewhere, don't want anything to do with Black Lives Matter, think that they are crazy people. And you see this in the polls today. Wait a second, let me finish my point. In the polls today, 2/3 of black Americans, 2/3, say that the saying should be all lives matter. 2/3. It's overwhelming in terms of white America. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you at the table, is you guys see this as somehow tied to the shooting in Houston. And I'm telling you, most people view the Black Lives Matter movement as juvenile, ineffective. This weekend, they were throwing stuff not only at Bernie Sanders, but at the Democratic National Committee and saying change will not happen through the political system.
Movement. They're getting bigger and bigger. They're getting more aggressive. They're getting more, the rhetoric, they're stepping up the rhetoric.
They're thugs.
Fry 'em like bacon. Come on.
When did people say outrageous things?
And I would disagree with Tom. I think people have the right to protest.
Sure.
Look at the Westboro Baptist Church, right?
Yeah.
They are as disgusting and despicable as they come, but they have a right to do it. However, when people are using what they're saying, and listen, we need to hear what Shannon Miles said. Why did Shannon Miles decide to execute that cop? Why?
Well, what the police in Houston said was that they assumed, they're acting on the basis at this point, that he was shot because he was in uniform. He was a cop, and as Dana said,
right, so is
this guy
is violence.
This
is
guy's
the
not
of Black Lives Matter stepping up.
Just
the
a moment. This guy is not some rights leader, Tom. This guy's a rank criminal with a long record of criminal behavior.
I know. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, they are sullying the good name of the civil rights movement. It's not a civil rights movement.
High five.
And I think, why not? If you can't shut down cities, I think Ferguson is not a protest. It is a mob, and they should shut it down.
You're hitting on something, and one, the black leaders in the country should step up and say, you know what, it's not Black Lives Matter. Get rid of this stupid group.
So it's
all lives matter, blue lives matter, white lives matter, all lives matter. How many people have you spoken to? Black leaders. Leo Terrell, good example, right? Do Black Lives matter? Yes, Black Lives matter. Do white lives matter? Yes. But when you say white lives matter, it removes it changes the debate. It's disfocusing the debate.
That's the argument coming from the Black Lives Matter people.
The black community, the leaders like yourself, should be out there in force saying, no more. Black Lives Matter it's based on a false narrative that never really happened.
Let me tell you
well, that's what David Clark is calling for. He's calling for that name to be eradicated.
Leaders should say we're not part of that movement.
Well, listen, I was going to tell you a short story, which is that over the weekend in Washington, D.C., where I live, the mayor was coming out saying, you know, we have this weekend, and this is not just in Washington, but all over the country, an explosion of black-on-black crime, high spikes in terms of murders in the cities. And she's saying we're going to do something more, we're going to add more cops, etc. Black Lives Matter shows up, shouts down the mayor. And this is a black mayor. And the mayor says, I'm not going to be intimidated by you. So this is not, you know, I sometimes think you guys are hearing it one way, I'm hearing it another way. You think that there's some kind of racial war about to start. I don't think that's it.
What do you hear then?
What I hear is that there are a bunch of very frustrated and I think impotent Black Lives Matter's leaders. They don't have an effective group, and they don't know how to create change, and all they're doing is lashing out. And by the way, not lashing out at Republicans, not lashing out at white leaders, lashing out principally at blacks, at black
And in
leadership.
fact, over the weekend, they actually rejected the DNC's. They had passed a resolution at the DNC meeting, and the Black Lives Matter rejected it. But Juan, let me ask you then, what do they want then?
Well, that's a good point.
What's the request?
Yeah, I'm with you, Dana. I mean, and by the way, guess what? I know she's not popular at this table, but that's what Hillary Clinton said when she was confronted. Said, what do you guys want? And they said, we just want to know that your heart is in the right place. And she said, you could fill Yankee Stadium with hearts. Tell us what's your agenda? What's your plan? And they said that was evidence that she wasn't sincere. That's how crazy these folks are.
Well, that's what their agenda is. It's okay to go ahead and kill cops.
No, nobody said that.
Oh,
they
really?
Never said that.
Pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon?
That's language.
Is that unclear to you?
What,
Those
shooting?
are their words.
Okay, if you feel that way,
their message.
I saw it as
if you want to water it down and dilute it because it makes you feel more comfortable,
I don't feel
that's on you.
No, the honesty
I'm talking
is what
about
I'm
the facts.
about.
That is the honest truth.
Well, I'll
when
tell
they
you
act like that, they're they're criminals,
Let me
and
just
they're
say-
calling for the murder of hardworking police
I
officers.
don't believe that.
What did they do to them? Everybody needs cops.
Yes.
Everybody needs cops in their community so their
Correct.
kids can play in parks. You can
Absolutely
walk down
right.
to the streets. You can go safely to
True.
schools so people can get to work to earn a living to support their family. How dare they compromise everybody else's safety?
They're not cops. They
They
didn't
are.
call for anybody
They
to
are.
execute cops. I'd be news to me, but I
Crazy.
know they don't like cops. And do they have a legitimate argument about what happened with Ferguson, Staten Island, Baltimore, in Houston with Sandra Bland? Yes, but this is not. Their movement seems to me to be empty-headed and without purpose. And then given,
and more people like you should be
I think
out there
people are saying
enforcing,
it.
Calling to shut it down.
Well, not necessarily shut them down, but call them for what they are, as Dana points out, with no purpose, with no goal, and certainly no productive goal. The more black leaders that do that, then eventually they will go. They'll be reduced to, oh, it's those Westboro Baptist types over there who are just making a lot of noise, not really affecting any change at all.
Yeah, but the people that show up to those protests and side with that movement and with their rhetoric and with their violence and the things that they suggest and call for, then you're no better than they are. Like, stand for something, choose to be part of a different group that is respectable, that is peaceful, that honors the values and the ideology of the civil rights movement that did a tremendous amount in this country. Show some respect for yourself and for those you love.
And it's not just they are calling for violence. They are doing, with the pigs in a blanket. They're calling for violence, but even when they aren't, they are calling for people to impede with the police wherever they see them. I see this on Facebook. They say get in there and stop them when they're working. And that causes danger. Police die when that happens. It's not just people who say execute them.
I wanted to bring that up because we're talking about, like, we want black leaders to stand up and say something. And I actually think a lot of this is being fueled not by the spoken word. It's on social media, in particular on Twitter, where law enforcement has already enough that they have to keep track of, but it's very difficult to keep track of social media as well. And there's a whole, it's like pouring fuel on the fire. And everybody's got a phone, everybody has access to it, and so there's actually, there's something to be said about speaking from a pulpit or speaking on television, but it's actually in the social media world where it needs to be handled better.
Can I throw one other stat out there? One, you talk about Ferguson, you talk about Baltimore, you talk about Houston. You named 3, right? There are 7 dead law enforcement officers in the last 10 days.
Right.
Seven dead in the last 10 days.
I didn't even realize
So if the incidences of law enforcement officers getting executed or getting killed, senseless crime, senseless murders is increasing, there are black leaders that have to step up and say this is having the wrong effect. The effect isn't to kill law enforcement. The effect is create a sense of understanding of what's going on in communities where they feel that blacks are being mistreated.
You know, I think it's important that everybody say that cops' lives matter and cops protect us all.
But they won't say that.
No, I'm
But Juan is saying
I'm saying it to you right here. But I'm also saying that it's also legitimate for people to protest if they feel that police are behaving in an excessively violent manner. But this Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, even for people who want to be supportive, you guys, it's a shame what you're doing here. It's wrong.
Thank you, Juan, for that. I appreciate it. They have to ask themselves this. Has the amount of blood spilled quenched your thirst yet?